What's going on, guys? Danny from Slug Restoration. Today we're working on my 2005 Chevy Silverado Duramax diesel 2500. We have a weird issue here. Long story short, it's gonna be we're replacing wheel bearing and we're gonna do the seal while we're in the back. This is a full float axle. Let me get this cap off, I'll show you. So I have my cap off. You can tell it's a full float because it has these bolts here. Once we get this pulled off, I'm gonna go ahead and pull the wheel off because it's gonna make it a little bit easier to do. But we'll remove these, I guess that's 8 bolts. The axle actually slides out without doing any other removal. So did get all of our bearings and seals here. So here's the inner race right there. Inner bearing, outer race and bearing, and our oil seal is right there. So we have to do this outside today because my lift's tied up, but this is probably how most of you guys are going to do it. So definitely block your front wheels, put a jack stand under it, get the wheel pulled off. We have a 19 millimeter. We're going to go ahead and zip these off, get a pan here because you will lose a little bit of fluid because that's a wet bearing. Those bolts pulled out. Now we can just kind of grab hold of this axle, and like I said, you will lose a little bit of rear fluid, gear lube. We'll let that drain a second and get this axle slid the whole way out. And once that's disengaged there, you can actually spin this freely. There will be nothing actually holding that from spinning because this is what ties into your ring and pinion and your spider gears. With that axle slid out, that's what it looks like. It's roughly 3 feet long with splines on the end. And now we can actually get in and see our bearing retaining nuts and the retainer that holds all that together. And to actually get this off, obviously we have to disassemble this, but we're also going to have to remove our brake rotor. So we'll take two bolts off of the caliper mounting bracket and just set that up here on the side here. And then the rotor itself, with a little bit of persuasion, will slip off. They are slip off rotors. Here we have some clunking and banging and parts falling out. So we also have another issue. I was prepared for it, but let's go ahead and get this rotor off and see what falls out here. Yep, that's kind of what I expected. That's horrible. So, as you can see, our emergency brake shoes sit inside here and they completely came apart. And that may have been a lot of our noise. So we'll double check. It is rare that these bearings go bad. And if this is not loose, then that was our whole problem. All that junk floating around in there. All right, like I said, I was prepared for this. We have a brand new set of emergency brake shoes, the actuators, and an AC Delco hardware kit for that because our stuff's wasted and I kind of thought these were getting wore out. They usually do. You get some miles on your truck, chances are these are going to be wore out. And if you're going to do these, just buy the rest of this stuff. This is actually the lever that comes through. It actuates your emergency brake shoes, and you're probably going to need all of this stuff. Once you get the axle out, there's a retaining clip. You kind of get something on there, pull it. You can see the little tab that sticks down there. We can go ahead and pull that out. I'll set that down here on the side. Give you a close-up look at that if I can grab a hold of it. It's just a snap ring with a little tab that sticks down. So we'll set that to the side. There is a little block in there, and that's your lock block. You can grab that lock block with your magnet. It just slips out. It's pretty much just a square block that locks the keyway on the spindle to your lock nut. Once we have that block out, we can just rotate this outer lock nut around. You might have to use a slight force. They do make a socket that has all these prongs in it, but you can use a brass punch, or in this case it's loose enough. While we're right here, I'm just going to use my screwdriver and move this around. You can see it's coming right off. Once you get that knock loose, it's just simple as unthreading this. We'll get this out, show you what's behind it. So once we have that unthreaded out of the way, we'll set that to the side again, and there's our bearing. So now we can actually grab a hold of the spindle, and the seal will be a little tight on there, but we'll slip this whole thing off and go ahead and investigate our bearings, make sure everything looks like it should. So once we have this tore down this far, these seals are kind of a one-time use deal. You probably could reuse them, but just replace it for the money. It's not worth going back in. So as you can see, the outer race of that seal, or inner race, whatever you want to call it, is still stuck to the spindle here. And if we look at the new one, it's kind of a two-piece seal. So this piece is what's still on there. That kind of shiny section there is still on there, and our seal is actually under this bearing here. So it actually, this is a spinning seal. Kind of difficult to explain, but once you see it, you'll understand. So we'll go ahead and get the rest of that off there. We'll gently pry that off, get all this cleaned up. Obviously the outer bearing, once you get the seal out of the spindle or the hub here, once you get that outer seal out, inner seal and bearing, then you're going to drive this race out and you can access it from the inside. But to get that inner bearing out, if you look down in there, let me get my screwdriver as a pointer. Right here and right here is a notch. There's actually a snap ring that holds this assembly in, so it's actually going to come from that side out towards us once we remove that snap ring, and then we can replace that. Well, once we get that out, we can drive this race out. We'll put our new race in this side, put the new bearing on the inside, replace the snap ring, and then start reassembling here. All right, so once we get this big snap ring out, get that pulled out of here. It is a fight. I'm not gonna lie. If you don't have a big pair of snap ring pliers, is obviously idea, but you can use a pair of long needle nose and snap it in there, and with some patience you can get this out. As you can see, you're probably gonna need two hands to get it the rest of the way out, but let me get this out and we will get that inner bearing out. And once we tap that race out with your normal method, a bar punch, we'll go ahead and tap that out, work it around. That comes off. We'll set that there just for reference. Our snap ring is here, and we'll look inside here. We're gonna go ahead and clean everything up. We do still have to tap that one out. Again, it's gonna come out towards us in this angle here. And again, with some persuasion, our race and bearing, if I can pick it up, are out. We tapped on that pretty good, so I'm not even gonna think about using that, especially since we have a new one. So here's our old parts. Did make quite a mess, I have to clean up. So now we're gonna brake clean and clean all this hub out. Looks like there's no damage there. Honestly, I think the bearings were fine. We just had them, so we're gonna do them. So let me get all this cleaned up. Definitely take note of how this stuff came apart, what order, what direction it came apart, and we'll start going back together. With that all cleaned up, we look pretty good here. It did dent the very outside here, but that has no effect at all on sealing and or bearing race ride. So we're good with that. We're going to take our inner bearing and race here, and that's actually, if you took note when it came apart, this is actually going to go down through this way. And the bearing drops in first. The race is a light press fit into this spindle, or hub rather. I just dropped my bearing, but pretty much we're going to drop the bearing down this way. That stays in there, and then our race will drop in. We'll get that started in that bore and just lightly press that in, not hitting the bearing at all, but on the outside of the race, and we'll get that snug down in there until we can get this snap ring reinstalled. Once we get that lightly pressed in there, make sure everything's free, moves good. We're going to take our snap ring, and it is easier to put this in without this inner race in. So as you can see, it kind of drops right in. Without that, we'll go ahead and get that slid down and into that snap ring groove that is right above that race where we took it out. With that reinstalled, you can see snap ring snapped into place. bearing and race, everything spins freely, nothing's floppy or sloppy. We'll go ahead and get our, I guess that's your inner race. We'll go ahead and get that tapped down into place, and obviously there's a shoulder it goes down to it, so it's going to stop when it gets there. We'll make sure everything's cleaned off before we do, and then we'll drop our outer bearing in, and we will be ready for our seal. We're ready for our seal. We'll nice and gently, again, cleaning everything up, making sure there's no burrs, and nice and gently tap that in till it bottoms out on that shoulder. And with that seal in place, that's what it should look like. We're going to lightly go ahead and put some gear lube inside on these bearings and the seal surfaces, just so it's somewhat lubed up before we put it together, and then we'll add some later before we slide our axle in. So we got that slid back on, and as you can see, we got our nut put back on. We can lightly hammer. The most friction is going to be getting that seal back on its spot in the back there, and you will have to lightly tap it in as you spin it, and then take the nut and draw it in. You're going to tighten that nut up until it gets tight, so you reach some pretty good resistance. Pretty much you want to draw the hub bearing assembly all the way back on it, and then as we can see here, we only have so many spots where we can lock that down with that cotter or the square pin. So once we tighten it up and it's a fair amount of friction to turn that, then we're going to back it off until the next square there where I have it now. If I set my light down here, as you can see, we can spin that pretty freely. We will squirt some more lube in there, gear oil, but for now we'll take our pin here, slip it back in. Once we get all this lined up, it'll go right in there. We're a tiny bit off, but it is still going in there. We'll adjust that so that slides in easy. With that in there, we'll take our safety clip here, just holds that pin from coming out, and you pretty much just you want that tab to be in that notch, and you just kind of twist it so it pops in there. Right around, pops right in there, just holds that in place, keeps that pin from working its way out. And we're ready to slide our axle back in. With the axle slid back in, we'll go ahead and tighten all 8 of those bolts back up. There is a gasket there, make sure it's at least good or replace it. We're going to go ahead and put our brake system back together. With our wheel back on, center cap back on, the only thing left to do is check the fluid in the axle. So we'll lay it down, make sure it's level, and double check the fluid in the axle, top off if necessary. We did take and squirt some in. I did not show that, but we squirted some in the bearing assembly before we slid that axle in and tightened everything up. So we do have some gear oil in that assembly, but it does get fed from the differential. Thanks for stopping by. Have a good day.